whatever we do in social science has to be something that is concerned with the history of things, the development of relationships, the development of structures, something we frequently forget, but nevertheless, unconsciously at least, are implying in our work. Now, Niklas Luhmann wrote a book on the observation of modernity. Something that came recently to my mind, perhaps worthwhile being thinking about the observation of pre-modernity, pre-modern structures, pre-modern processes as well within modernity. So it's not only the pre-modern as it had been, but as it still is. And Niklas Luhmann wrote as well, or taught, something that had been called Observations from the Crow's Nest. I'm wondering, thinking about the observation of the pre-modern in modernity, if it is not better to talk in this case, alluding to Dostoevsky, thinking about observations or considerations out of the underground. If we move around in our societies today, with all the really or supposedly very modern devices, internet is permanently connection to the global village. We have modern technology in everyday life that is actually taking responsibility, apparently, from us. Then we nevertheless are permanently confronted with something that I implied unconsciously already, saying it is about the global village. The village is something that is pre-modern, a settlement that is not only a spatial settlement, but it has as well some social meaning. These observations here at the moment, the wandering of a contemporary in our world, are really about observations are made on different occasions. Being in one of the modern, possibly even postmodern cities in China, walking around, and I mean really walking around, meant in many cases to be confronted with something that would be typical for the old villages. People sitting together in small places, gaming. Whatever kind of gamings, maybe board games. And all this accompanied with the usual gossip. Other occasions, I was recently in Warsaw, and we had been talking about the Regulus table as a tradition with a very strong social cohesive aspect, as it had been typical for the villages, but as well for the towns, for the urban areas. At very specific areas, how they had been organized, how strict they had been closed or opened, when they opened, and for what they opened. This brings me actually to one of my favorite thoughts. I'm still wondering if there's literature on this, being too lazy really to check it, occasionally coming across it. Still, the meaning of traditional gatherings in socio-political terms, the typical forms of socializing typical for different countries. The pub in Ireland, mentioning this first because I spent so many years there. It had been a public space emerging or developing out of the private living rooms. So the borders opening, taking a specific public form and being there as a form, as a space and time for socializing. The Viennese coffee house, not only actually typical for Vienna or not even for Austria all alone, but in many cases a typical gathering spot for gathering. If I'm wandering through Vienna, or as well through some places here in Poland, in Czech Republic, I always felt this specific way of, I'm hesitating, socializing, but as well of thinking, of being together and developing something in this togetherness. And of course, this is going far beyond these spaces. It is going far beyond the specific location and times of thinking. The cafe, the bar in Italy. The cafe, I say, as the German coffee house, very strict, often having the atmosphere of a waiting room in the train station. And there we come to the very pronounced expression of what is going on. Supposedly, I never found this, Lenin said the Germans would never make a revolution. And one of the reasons is that they, before entering the platform of the train station, they have to buy a special ticket. So this law and order that plays a role throughout the life in specific places, expressed in certain behaviors, but as well expressed in the way of thinking of how can we approach reality. So, in a nutshell, we are talking about ways of socializing by way of setting a framework in which we are thinking as well about social transformation. Apparently this always happens still in the small places where actually hegemonic systems and hegemonic thinking is developed, counter-hegemonic as well, but where it has to be ingrained in the brains of people, of ourselves. So policy making is not a matter from top down, even if this is, of course, the violence, the power of the state, as Max Weber said, the only legitimate power. But it is as well this process of emerging hegemonic thinking that only makes it possible that in a certain way people act. And still, as Marx said, they make history. They make history, man makes history, even if under certain conditions. A decisive point we always forget when talking today about large policies, top-down, and large figures with charisma or a special talent governing the world. So what we are thinking about is, of course, important when talking about Trump, when talking about Putin, when talking about the leaders in Korea. Now, well, it is funny, supposedly the Japanese Prime Minister, I think, suggested Mr. Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. This is part of the story, but the really interesting and the really important part is how it is dealt with when people are thinking in their daily life about the meaning of such issues. Large policies, large scenes, large stages, actually always based on what is going on the small stages, in the villages, on the small courts we always organize in our daily life. What it means is not least today that we have to rethink populism in a different way. We usually start from the top. We usually have these charismatic leaders addressing certain problems people have. Shouldn't we think the other way around and think about the problems of society, production, reproduction of daily life? In economic terms, of course, socio-economic security, but as well how we socialize, how we get together with others to address our problems in daily life. Sitting now here in base camp, student accommodation, not probably, but definitely the oldest student. And I really think it is for me studying. Occasionally getting together with students here outside of the lecture halls, outside of the seminar rooms, and seeing their behavior. It is not observing in the strict sense from outside, but it is the opportunity to be a little bit of a part. Participatory observation, we all know this from social research. And it is important doing so, but it is important then really to link this observation of daily life to what is going on in society. So making real the global village as modern organization, pre-modern organization of social life. So there we are. Look at the way we behave, we move around, the way we address people, the respect we show, the hesitation we show when it comes to criticizing people, and the harshness of some of the critique. One issue that strikes me frequently is that we have difficulties, at least, when it comes to criticizing our immediate the person who are standing in front of us. The person in front of us is not that. It is a who. It is the personification of something, but in this case it is not the personification of something, but it is a person. And there we have difficulties to criticize, to discuss openly, and we have difficulties not to hide ourselves. As soon as we are approaching an area of anonymity, it is at least much easier. in a way, a Machiavelli from below. The Machiavelli from below being able to address the ruling classes in terms of their own doing, in terms of their own ruling. Something where we have to turn around hegemony and where we have to think about history matters. History matters in terms of the way we live together, and this is something that is continuously going on and then has to be translated into certain superstructures. And I say superstructures now not in the Marxian understanding of base and superstructure, but I say it in terms of generalized patterns of living together. Can we do so? How do we do it? How do we translate permanently this? Or do we leave the translation to others, to these charismatic leaders? A fine line, I guess, a fine line that we have to overcome in terms of controlling it, instead of leaving it controlled by others. Now we have different areas where this is relevant. The relationship to professionals, to doctors, to nurses, to teachers. Is this a specific relationship? Is the other, the professional, playing a role that is distant from everyday life? Or is it, and if so, how is it integrated in just ordinary relationships? We talk about professionals, we talk about politicians. Part of the populism debate is politicians who are there and speak the language, express the desires, express the concerns of people, ordinary people. But there is another point to it, to populism, or in this case to popularity. We may say it is politicians stepping out of their role, of their professional role. Weber talking about the politician as politics as vocation. Stepping out of this role and being human. In this light, we can actually wonder about the frequently made contradiction between Trump and Merkel. Of course, there are huge differences between them, but isn't one of the political arts of Merkel this being popular in terms of presenting herself as just a human being? Again, a fine line between Trump and Merkel, between this kind of populism and being popular. But part of it is as well that Merkel stepped out of this professional role and wanted to do exactly what I said before, making things right for everybody, acceptable for everybody, not offending anybody, not having any clear line in her political thought, in her political ongoing, but being there as a person like you and me. The loss of profile, what is called today post-democracy, the loss of profile in terms as well of the demos. The demos disappears, as post-democrats say. The demos disappears and doesn't play a role anymore. Everything is given by certain laws, which, funnily enough, makes law disappearing as well. Social rights? No. We have foundations, we have philanthropic capitalism that replaces law. Trade, free trade now, which is simply the power of the strongest. International relations, these are not really negotiations in many cases, following strict rules, but it is as well purely a matter of power, executing power arbitrarily. So this is something we have to think about when it comes to history. What are the patterns, the ongoing patterns of building up fear in our daily lives, building up joys, building up connections? There, of course, mutual help and solidarity plays a huge role. Not as a political fact, but as a social fact. It plays a role by way of living together and producing daily life. There are many attempts to make this visible, awarding voluntary work, volunteering. The problem is that actually society is split as well in this respect. Having a political body, having institutions regulating, having the state power as the ultimate and only power that is legitimate. And on the other hand, daily life, of course with strong economic powers there as well, but independent apparently from the other. The one determining the other following or not following, or simply being ignorant. Modernity, pre-modern patterns, and we should not forget that the state is actually an invention, an institution of modernity. So we have to think as well in very fundamental terms about this meaning of the state as modern institution, not replacing but overarching pre-modern ways of living together. A major task for social science to bring this together instead of analyzing the different aspects as different and as influencing, possibly influencing each other. Recently, I saw some books, a book series actually, with a kind of amazing title. It had been history of daily life. Daily life in churches, daily life in armies, daily life in daily life. This is something we have to research now in history, and we have to research today as well. And we usually do it by maintaining this dichotomy. So my plea here is not understanding history in terms of stages, pre-modern, modern, postmodern, and something like this. But understanding history really in terms of the meaning, the range and scope of the history that is given. The French school comes through, Brodel, as something that is given and that we are coping with without actually thinking about history. Still, we should think about history in terms of this matters. Whatever we are doing today matters. And there we are in this conflict. It matters to us personally, making a career, getting on, or it matters to us personally of giving up a career and hindering our own professional standard progress. But being true to ourselves and saying, this is what I want to do. I was talking the other day to a student from Turkey. I said, what you have to do instead of fighting, struggling with your studies is take some time off. Before going on to a master, take some time off. Find yourself. This is important, to find what you want to do, what you want to study, and how you want to study it. So it is this kind of being true to yourself in this very moment, considering that there is more to history, the second plane, where we are dealing with more than these events. There we are having a setting, political elections that matter, that decide about the next years, things like this. And always we have to deal with the people, not primarily, possibly with these institutions. And then we have the long-term history, although I'm frequently wondering if it is, to which extent it is justified to talk about it. This is again going back to experiences from a kind of global wandering. We always say this is typical Asian, this is typical European, this is typical Latin American, African. And of course there are certain things that matter, that are relevant. But there are other things that at least have to motivate us, to bring us there, to question this, to ask, how relevant is this? It's permanently coming up, talking to friends in China, talking to friends, Chinese friends here in Europe. Something that is coming up where, of course, different matters, where even difference matters in terms of national traditions. One of the first questions often coming up is, from where are you? When it is clear that you are not from the place where you live. Here, amongst students, it's an international student dorm. From where are you? The reply, I don't know, it doesn't matter, from different places, is causing irritation. So still in this way it matters. At the same time, if we look at a certain general behavior, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of all the same. The baseline. Modern, pre-modern, which kind of history matters? It's something well worthwhile to think about. to think about as matter of social science, of daily life, and large social structures.
La raison donne en son cratère, c'est l'éruption de la fin. Du passé, faisons table rase, fous l'esclave, debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons tous. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain. Il n'est pas de sauveur suprême, ni Dieu, ni César, ni tribun. Travailleurs, sauvons-nous nous-mêmes, décrétons le salut commun. Pour que le voleur rende gorge, pour tirer l'esprit du cachot. Soufflons nous-mêmes notre forge, battons le fer quand il est chaud. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain. Ces paroles qui trottent dans la tête des opprimés du monde entier sont celles d'un de nos poètes qui s'appelait Eugène Potier. Aujourd'hui, le monde a changé. Est-ce qu'il y a moins d'exploités, de chômeurs, d'enfants affamés, pour qu'on puisse se reposer, de chanter, de chanter, de chanter, de chanter. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain.